So John, next you're going to be taking one of your pieces that you rough cut a few minutes ago, and you're going to be creating one side of the box?
Yes.
Okay. So what's first in the process?
Well, we've got to resaw this because the box in its finished dimension should be about 3/8 to 7/16. This happens to be 3/4 of an inch.
So it's too thick right now?
It's too thick.
Okay.
So I'm just going to eyeball this. You know, the tendency is to do a lot of measuring, but the truth is if you train your finger and your eye, you can get within 1/16 of an inch, and in rough dimensioning stock, that's probably close enough. So let's target here for leaving, let's say, 7/16.
So you're going to leave a little bit more than half of that board?
Yes. I'm just going to put a mark on here. Try to get everything started nice and square. And then bring, as I mentioned earlier, bring the saw in instead of cutting off to the side like this. Bring the saw into the front and then just kind of push it. Now I could be a lot more aggressive with this. Use the full length of the saw and really bear down. But the truth is when you're sawing, as your grandpa said, and it was right, let the saw do the work.
So just a little patience and you come out better in the end?
Yeah, and plus it's a pleasure. Now, our audience can't smell this, but there's a smell coming off this saw curve, and there's a sound of a nice sharp edge tool hitting wood, and it's just a pleasure to use a tool that's not howling, that's not going to cut you, and it's pretty safe. So there we have that piece for the side.
That's great. So this piece is going to end up being the side of the box.
Yeah. Okay, what we're going to do is just work through the process of putting this board here right like we would for all of the other pieces. So I'm going to demonstrate how to work through this board with all the procedures to get the box in a position to put together.
Okay, great.
I'm going to start with this side, and we're going to plane this face as flat as we can get it.
Okay.
And that's a pretty aggressive cut because I changed that just a little bit ago. It's still a little aggressive. The great thing about planing is you can kind of plane that depth on the fly. So that's making a nice, clean surface, and it's ready for the next step. So I mark it with this maker's mark, and then I'm going to get this face, or this edge I should say, at a right angle to this face.
Okay.
And I'll mark it.
And so that surface that you just planed is now the outside of the box?
In this case, it's going to be the outside of the box.
Okay.
What I'm doing now is getting all the saw marks off. Trying to make a nice full shave of it. And we'll see what that looks like. If you hold it up to the light, there won't be any light sticking through it.
Yep, that's great.
Then to mark that, I'm going to put a little V right there.
So now you know that this is this either the top or bottom of the box?
This is the outside bottom.
Okay.
We're always going to work off this reference face and this edge for all the marking I'm going to do from here after. Now I'm going to put a marking gauge on this, and we're going to get this set up for the other edge.
So right now you're setting off the height of the box.
Yes, this is going to be the height of the box. I normally mark that with a pencil so I can see it, but in this case, I think it's such a small amount, we can probably get that out without much trouble. Let's see if that's close to my line. Right on the line. Now we've got to make sure that that's square to this face. So it's off just a little bit. And Jay, it's what might be a 64th here. If you don't get it out now, it's going to carry all the way through the box. So it's best to get everything square and parallel.
And you try to get all your pieces the same at this point in time?
The same at this point in time, yes. That's perfect. If you hold it up to the light.
Mud?
No light whatsoever.
Oh, that's great.
Okay. And then the next thing we're going to do is get the proper thickness out. That's actually sawed pretty close to the line. So we're going to take our marking gauge again. We're going to mark off of this face that's already plain flat.
Okay.
And we're going to get our thickness of this board. And what I'm going to do is find the very narrowest point. And that's the point we're going to mark right there. Then we're going to mark around this board like so. Going to be a little bit too plain there, but we'll jack that plane down a little bit and we can knock that off pretty quickly. So if you notice what we've done, we've got the edges square to the face is flat. Now we're going to plane this face parallel to this face so the board will be perfectly flat.
So you'll have the board that is flat and straight, and it'll be the same thickness throughout.
Yes. And we did that without a joiner or a planer or a table saw.
So you're starting out with an aggressive cut.
Yes.
And then you'll be taking less off as you get closer.
Yes. I got a high spot right here, so I'm going to get that out of the way. I'm going to come back with my smoothing plane and try to take all those plane marks out. This one's set a little thin.
Nice light cut. Here.
Yeah. Nice.
Nice even shaving the whole way.
And if you could put your finger on that, really there's sandpaper that would get that, but it's called 2000 grit plus.
If you were here, you'd see a nice shiny surface. It'd take a long time to sand to that.
Yes. And look on the sides there, we cut right to our lines. See, they're vanished away.
Uh-huh.
Look like we might be just a
little thicker
there,
on one
a little
side.
thicker right there. Let's clean it up because I've said you need to keep these all dimensioned correctly. We're going to take a little bit right there because that's where it's a little high. Got it. So what we're going to do now is we've got one face flat, the other face parallel flat. We've got the two edges parallel together, and that means 4 of our edges are ready to assemble into a box.
That's great.
There are two edges, 2 end pieces remaining that have to be made right. Now I'm going to quiz you to see how we're doing on this.
Okay.
I'm going to mark one of these ends with a square.
Uh-huh.
Which side of this board should I put my square on?
Well, we started off this edge as a reference edge, so
Yes.
I'm assuming that we'll work from there throughout the process.
Great, good. That's a good observation. So I'm going to put my square on that edge, and I'm going to put a mark, and take it to the pinch hook. Saw to that line. Now what happens a lot of times, Jay, once you get pretty proficient at this, you wouldn't even have to put a mark on that. You can just saw that.
Saw straight across?
Just saw straight across, and if you train your eye to that, it's remarkable how square you can saw a board.
So let me interrupt you for a second here. I see you've got a special jig here and a different saw that we were using before. When you're offering your class here, the center has a good complement of hand tools in its tool room. We'll have these fixtures ready to use so that the class can share sufficient fixtures.
Yes.
But if students had their own tools, they'd be encouraged to bring them.
Yes.
Okay. Can you tell us a little bit about the saw and these tools?
Well, this is a shooting plane. It's actually not designed to be a shooting plane, but it's such a nice little smoothing plane. It's flat on the bottom, and the side is square to the bottom. So that means you can get the edge of your board perfectly flat and square and plumb.
So with this shooting board, you're going to make that plane take a square cut and a clean cut along the end.
Clean this edge up, yes.
Okay.
And this is called a bench hook, and what you do is you put your reference edge against the fence, and then you would just saw to the line. This is a saw. I did a little research on this saw. Didn't know much about it, but it's called an F. Constantine cast steel, which means it was made somewhere between 1849 and 1900.
Oh, okay.
Not sure when, but this saw is well over 100 years old. And it's just a beautiful little saw, fits nice in your hand, and is a great extension of your arm. And
Sounds good.
I spent some time sharpening these saws up. In fact, when we do that saw rehabilitation class, we're going to teach you how to sharpen a handsaw, which will be a lot of fun.
So if you find an old saw like this at a flea market, you can take the class and you'll teach them how to sharpen it and get it working.
How to get it working correctly.
That sounds great. I look forward to that.
So just push this flat down on the surface here, keep it flat against this fence here, and then just make really light cuts. Now what I'm doing is going back and forth and advancing the board with this left hand.
Just moving it over a little bit at a time.
Yes. So now what we're going to do is we're going to mark this board, and I turn that board around because this is my reference fence. And these side pieces need to be about 10 3/4 to 11 inches. So I'm going to mark that like that.
So that'll be the length of your box.
That's the length of the box. That's the final length of the box. Let's see how we can do just cutting that thing without putting a line on it. I'm just letting the saw do the cutting. Not bearing down at all. And let's see how we did. The good news is if it's not straight, we can always clean it up on the shooting board. And I'm not sure how much of that you can see on camera, but that's a pretty nice finish for a piece of end-grain pine. And that's the goal you're looking for, is to always keep your tools nice and sharp, everything square and at right angles. And when you begin to assemble the box, it makes life so much easier. Okay, we've got this one board that's flat on one face, parallel flat on the other side. Two ends are at right angles to both faces and parallel to each other. And now the two ends have been cut square and to length. And we would need to get all three of our boards in this position.
Okay.
Once we do, then we've got to plow the groove for the lid and for the bottom. And we do it with this little device here.
So at this point, you're going to have two sides that are exactly the same. And the piece that makes the two ends, are they individually cut at this point, or are they still together as one part?
They are cut, because that's a great point. I already cut them to the proper 4-inch length, because when you start plowing this groove, if you have to come back and square up the ends, you're going to have tear out in the edge of the groove. And you don't want that. So this avoids that by going ahead and cutting them the length and plowing the grooves at the same time you do with the sides. So we got to hold this to this little device here, bring it over on the edge. Now that's our outside face, so that's going to go down.
Okay.
And this is an old plow plane. These are a dime a dozen at a flea market.
Really, you can still find those?
You can still find these. If you don't, you can go to antique tool shows. You can find them there. It's a great little tool that really does take the place of a router in a place like this, in a situation like this.
Okay.
So let's see how it works. The key is to hold it against the fence. Start on one end away from the...
So you don't start at the very beginning edge of the board. You start in the middle someplace.
Yes.
And you're working your way back?
Yes, working my way back. Now I'm at the edge, which means I want to keep this against the fence and straight on that line. Making nice little curly cues. That's not quite deep enough, so let me back up here and put a line on this. It's about not quite half that you're looking for here.
So you're going to make one groove for the top and one groove for the bottom at the same time?
At the same time. And you carry this process all the way through each piece, so you're always doing things in bunches. You would never want to go back and try to do something later, because it just kind of messes up the flow of your work.
Okay.
Now what I'm doing is keeping this fence against the edge of the board. I'm pressing down lightly, and I'm keeping this tool in line with the groove I've already plowed.
Okay.
And then just making light cuts. and makes nice little shavings like that.
The depth of the cut is set by how much pressure you push on it, or?
Really, the depth of cut is set by that pressure and the sharpness of the tool. If the tool is not sharp and it starts skating, you're going to have a wide mountain and valley production in your groove there. So I'm a little light on this edge, so I'm just going to kind of pick that up there now.
And do you think about grain direction in the board when you have no choice?
You really have no choice because you're going to be plowing one way in the bottom and the other way in the top. So it's either 6 1/2 dozen of another. So that one's finished. We've got just a little tear out there on the side. Now the tendency is to grab a piece of sandpaper. And if you grab a piece of sandpaper and you get the grit down in here and you had to come back and cut this a little bit deeper, you've got an abrasive in there that's really hard on tools. So just before assembly, you might want to clean that up a little bit there.
Okay.